Imagine stepping onto a luxurious cruise ship, expecting sun, sea, and peace, but finding something else entirely. Behind the shiny decks and smiling crew, there's a darkness no one talks about. Passengers vanish without a trace. Hallways twist in ways that shouldn't be possible. The fog that drifts across the ship seems alive, moving with purpose. And somewhere in the shadows, something waits. These stories aren't made up. They come from real encounters, shared by people on Reddit, and confirmed by multiple witnesses. Every name has been changed, every event double-checked. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will make you wonder what really hides behind the ship's doors. Your curiosity keeps these true stories alive. Story 1. The fog came in quietly, rolling from the open sea, swallowing the entire upper deck before anyone noticed. I'm Jason Keller, 34, a freelance photographer from Boston. I joined this Caribbean cruise to capture sunrise photos over the water. But the trip turned into something else, something I still can't explain, something I barely escaped. It began on the first night. A thick, eerie fog wrapped around the ship. People on deck 11 kept laughing and drinking, treating it like nothing unusual. But I could barely see 20 feet ahead. I went to the railing, camera in hand. The fog caught the moonlight in strange ways, shifting and moving as if it were breathing. Shapes flickered inside it. Too solid to be clouds, too real to ignore. I felt uneasy and went back inside. The hallway lights flickered as I walked. Some dimmed, others brightened. Cabin numbers didn't line up. 1104, 1102, 1111, 1103. Doors I passed before looked slightly open, shadows shifting inside even though the rooms were dark. I asked a crew member about it. He smiled stiffly and said, "All systems normal, sir. Just a bit of fog." But his eyes gave him away. They looked nervous. That night, the fog grew heavier on the observation deck. I heard a child laughing, faint and distant. I turned toward the sound, but no one was there. Then I saw her, a woman in her 30s, pale, her wet hair sticking to her face. She didn't speak. She only raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the lifeboats before vanishing into the mist. I checked my camera. Nothing. No photo, no shadow, no reflection. Just the fog moving strangely, pulsing like it was alive. The next morning, the captain made an announcement, calm and casual. Minor fog on upper decks. No action needed. But I noticed the lifeboats had shifted slightly overnight. Some hung unevenly. There was fresh water on the railings, but it wasn't from the sea. Something had changed. At lunch, I glanced at the passenger manifest on a screen. 2 new names appeared, Mara Linton and Elias Crow. I asked guest services about it. The receptionist checked her papers and said softly, "All passengers are accounted for." When I asked about their cabin numbers, she looked away. A cold dread crawled through me. That night, the fog returned, thicker than before. As I walked down deck 11, the hall seemed to stretch. One cabin, 112, wasn't there before. The door was open slightly. I pushed it and stepped inside. The room looked normal, but the carpet was damp, marked with wet footprints that led nowhere. On the bed lay a small brass key, faintly glowing like it had a heartbeat. When I picked it up, the fog outside the window moved faster, swirling violently. From the vents came whispers, soft but clear. "Follow, follow." I turned on my recorder and muttered, "This helps keep these real encounters alive." The hallway around me started to change. Doors stretched, numbers flickered. The fog slid under the cracks, cold and breathing. Ahead of me, a stairwell appeared where there had been a wall before, the key pulse. Edged stronger, as if pulling me toward it. Every step down that stairwell felt heavier than the last. The whispers grew louder, mixing laughter and crying. I knew then the fog wasn't natural. It was alive. It had been watching me, waiting. At the bottom, I reached a corridor I didn't recognize. It shouldn't have existed. Deck 2 was supposed to hold storage and crew rooms, but this corridor stretched endlessly. The walls flickered with dim lights. Cabin numbers glitched in and out. 204, 207, 204, 209. Each door stood open, but every room was empty. Shadows moved across the metal walls, and in those reflections I saw faces. Faces from missing passenger reports. Some looked desperate. Others smiled with hollow eyes. The whispers multiplied, hundreds of voices at once. At the far end, one door had a strange sign. Observation Deck 0. Authorized personnel only. Below it, the fog rolled like waves. The brass key grew hot in my hand, pulsing with each beat of my heart. I stepped closer. Inside the room, crates floated in knee-deep water. Each crate held old manifests, brass keys, and faded photos of people who had vanished. The water reflected their distorted faces, stretching and twisting as I stared. A faint lullaby drifted from the vents above, slow and warped. It said my name. That's when I understood. The fog wasn't just weather. It was part of the ship, feeding on the missing. Every passenger it took became trapped here, somewhere below Deck 0. The brass key wasn't a souvenir. It was a connection. It tied me to the ship. I saw movement near a hatch at the end of the corridor. When I touched it, the water surged upward, forming ghostly faces. Some reached for me, mouths open in silent screams. The whispers turned to shouts. Choose, stay, leave. I pressed the brass key to a crate and the water calmed slightly. A hidden stairwell appeared, leading deeper down. I followed, the fog curling around my legs like cold hands. The air grew freezing. Then I saw her again, the woman from before. Leah Mercer. The name echoed in my head, though I never heard it spoken. Her wet hair hung over her face, and her eyes were black voids. She pointed downward, saying nothing. The fog reacted to her, swirling around us like it obeyed her will. I knew I should turn back, but I couldn't. The key pulsed stronger, dragging me deeper. From the vents above came a child's laughter, mixed with crying. Shadows danced along the walls, forming glimpses of the lost. The further I went, the more I realized. The ship itself was alive, and the fog was its breath. It fed on those who vanished, keeping them here forever. The stairwell opened into a massive chamber. Water sloshed around my ankles. The air smelled metallic. The fog rolled like waves, glowing faintly, moving in rhythm with the beating of the brass key. Faces formed in the mist, some crying, some laughing, some whispering words I couldn't understand. Then Leah appeared again, floating above the water. The fog shuddered at her presence. She wasn't a victim. She was part of it, a guardian of this hidden deck. Crates drifted around her, filled with brass keys and the names of passengers long gone. The whispers became screams. The walls pulsed like veins. I pressed the brass key against another crate, and the fog recoiled slightly but grew louder. I could feel the whole chamber breathing, like the ship had lungs. A deeper stairwell appeared below me, the key still pulsing. I understood then. The key was more than metal. It was my link to this place. Without it, I'd be one of them. The fog wrapped tighter around my legs, showing faces of the missing. I whispered into my recorder, voice trembling. If anyone finds this, and you want more true cruise horror stories, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It keeps these accounts alive. The stairwell led to one final room. Water rose to my chest, cold and thick. Shadows twisted, forming monstrous versions of the passengers who had vanished. Leah lifted her hand, pointing to a narrow exit. The whispers grew frantic. Choose, stay, leave. I climbed onto a floating crate, clutching the key. The water shifted beneath me, forming faces on the surface. Some begged, some laughed, some screamed in silence. I followed the key's pulse toward the exit, where the fog shone faintly, alive and watching. Leah's shape stretched unnaturally, her face dissolving into the mist. The fog pulsed brighter, whispering the names of the lost. 3 slow knocks echoed deep within the chamber. I froze. The water, the fog, the key, all throbbed together in one rhythm. I realized then that Deck 0 wasn't just a secret deck. It was alive. It remembered every passenger, and it was waiting for the next one. I stepped out into a corridor that looked familiar. Sunlight bounced off the polished rails, and passengers walked by smiling, unaware of anything strange. Crew members passed politely, their calm faces hiding what lingered beneath the surface. Yet I could still feel the fog's slow pulse under the ship, hear faint whispers curling through the vents. The brass key burned against my palm. Then came the sound again. 3 slow knocks, steady and deliberate. I froze. The fog, Deck 0, and Leah Mercer weren't gone. They were waiting, patient and quiet, for whoever dared to come next. The hallway looked normal, but everything felt slightly wrong. The light seemed too bright, too clean. Beneath it, the ship itself seemed to breathe. Every reflection on the polished walls shimmered, showing faint faces that shouldn't have been there. Passengers long gone, their eyes following me. The brass key throbbed in my hand, pulsing faster like it wanted to warn me. Laya appeared at the end of the corridor, her pale form floating just above the floor, eyes black and unblinking. She didn't speak. She only raised one hand and pointed toward the same maintenance hatch I had found before. I followed, feeling my pulse match the key's beat. Cold water swirled around my ankles as I descended, the fog wrapping around me like living ropes. The chamber below had changed. Crates floated in the dark water, each one filled with brass keys and old passenger manifests. Some names I recognized from old reports, people who had vanished at sea years ago. The air stank of salt, rust, and decay. The whispers grew louder, voices tangled together, some calling my name, others warning, others laughing softly. The brass key in my hand pulsed harder, binding me to that impossible lower deck. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the ship wouldn't let me. It was alive, and it demanded I stay. I pressed the key against a crate, and the water surged violently, faces forming in its rippling reflection. Some were crying, others smiling cruelly. From the vents above, a distorted lullaby echoed, warped and childish, whispering my name. That's when I realized the key wasn't for escape. It was a link, tying me to the ship's dark memory. A faint light shimmered at the far end of the chamber, glowing from a narrow exit. Shadows moved along the walls, twisting and shifting, forming the terrified faces of the missing. I stepped forward, heart racing, every movement making the air tremble. The entire place pulsed like a living creature breathing around me. I climbed the stairs and stepped through the exit, emerging onto deck 6. Everything looked normal again. Passengers chatted happily, completely unaware of what slept beneath them. Crew members smiled, walking by with polite nods. Yet, I could still hear faint whispers beneath the hum of the engines. The brass key throbbed faintly in my hand, waiting. 3 soft knocks echoed from below, steady, haunting, endless. I stopped cold. The fog, Deck 0, and Leia Mercer were still there, waiting patiently for the next curious soul. Even days later, I hear them in my dreams. The fog, the key, the ship that remembers. No one leaves Deck 0 unchanged. And one day, someone else will follow the key. The ship had rooms that shouldn't exist, yet someone was staying in all of them. My name's Rachel Donovan, 32, a travel blogger from Miami. I booked this Caribbean cruise to unwind, but it became something else, a nightmare beneath glittering lights and polished metal. The first sign came right when I boarded. I looked at the passenger manifest out of curiosity and found a name that shouldn't have been there, Leia Mercer. The crew told me all the names were correct, but their eyes said otherwise. I saw her that night on Deck 9, standing by the railing, hair damp and clinging to her face, staring out at the water. When I blinked, she was gone. That night, I heard faint footsteps outside my cabin. Through the peephole, there was nothing, just silence. When I checked the manifest again, her name now had a cabin number, 9112. I went there. The door was slightly open, water seeping across the carpet. Inside was clean, untouched, but my recorder caught a whisper. Leave, or stay forever. Every time I tried to reason it away, something else went wrong. Cabin numbers shifted, hallways stretched too long, reflections in the windows showed passengers that weren't real. Even the dining hall felt wrong, smiling faces, repeated menus, and that faint saltwater smell that didn't belong. Later, I followed a moving shadow into the empty theater. The seats were soaked. The air hummed faintly, carrying the same lullaby I'd heard before. On stage sat a brass key on a red velvet cushion, glowing faintly like it had a heartbeat. When I picked it up, the whole room shook. Water trickled across the floor. Whispers filled my ears. You found me. Now follow. A small door had appeared at the back, leading to a corridor that shouldn't exist. Numbers flickered on the doors, 912 repeating, vanishing, returning again. The key pulsed hard against my palm. I whispered into my recorder, voice shaking. If anyone finds this and wants more verified true cruise horror stories, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It keeps these stories alive. The corridor warped and twisted, growing longer with every step. Water pooled beneath me, even though it shouldn't. A staircase appeared leading down. My flashlight barely cut through the dark as I descended. The key pulsed faster, urging me on. The air was thick with whispers, words overlapping until I couldn't tell where they came from. Cabin numbers repeated over and over. Inside each door, faces flickered in the shadows, passengers from years ago, silent and watching. Then I saw her, Leia, floating just above the rising water, her black eyes locked on me. The walls seemed to bend toward her, the ship shifting around her presence. I gripped the key tighter. It vibrated like a living thing. The door at the end of the corridor said, "Crew only." I opened it. Inside were crates half submerged in dark water, each filled with brass keys and old ship manifests. Photos of missing passengers clung to the damp wood. Footsteps echoed behind me, but no one was there. Wet prints crawled along the walls, up the ceiling. I followed Leia deeper into the dark. The corridor twisted into impossible angles. Water rose to my chest, freezing cold. Faces appeared in the ripples, some reaching out, others laughing silently. I whispered into the recorder again. "This place is alive. It knows I'm here." At the end was a sealed door labeled Deck 0, yet it stood open, waiting. The key pulsed violently. I stepped through, and the world warped around me. The chamber inside wasn't real. It couldn't be. Water surged up my body. Shadows shifted across the walls, forming the faces of the missing. The whispers grew louder, endless. Leia floated ahead, raising a hand, pointing to a stairwell descending even deeper. The key burned in my palm, binding me tighter to this nightmare. I pressed it against a crate, and the fog recoiled for a second before surging again. Faces screamed from the water. The lullaby grew louder, distorted, pulling me further in. I whispered into my recorder one last time. If anyone ever finds this and wants more verified cruise horror stories, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It helps keep them alive. The key pulsed violently. The door ahead glowed faintly. Leia floated before it, eyes empty. Shadows twisted, water churned, and I realized the key wasn't a way out. It was a promise. The ship remembered me now. Deck 0 had marked me. I stumbled into a familiar corridor. Sunlight glared off polished rails. Passengers laughed nearby, unaware. Crew members walked by, smiling politely, but their eyes flicked toward the floor, as if listening for something. The faint whispers lingered beneath the engine's hum. Reflections shimmered with faces that didn't belong. 3 slow knocks echoed from below, deep, patient. I froze. Silence followed. The corridor stretched on, normal yet not. I gripped the brass key tighter, feeling it pulse with my heartbeat. I knew I'd have to go back. Deck 0 wasn't done with me. Leia appeared again at the end of the hall, her black eyes watching, her voice whispering my name. The ship breathed around me. The water stirred below. I whispered to myself, "It's still here." The brass key glowed faintly, binding me once more to its secret. 3 knocks echoed again. The ship remembered. Deck 0 waited. "You shouldn't follow." I rushed straight to guest services, trying to check her name. "There's a passenger walking around the ship. She isn't supposed to be here," I said, breathless. The clerk frowned, typing quickly before looking back at me. "Sir, all passengers are accounted for. Everyone's listed properly. Maybe you need some rest." But something inside me screamed that wasn't true. I hurried back to the corridor, heart pounding. The lights flickered overhead, stretching shadows across the walls. Doors that had been side by side a moment ago were now out of order. Cabin 722 had become 724. Cabin 720 was gone completely. A puddle shimmered near my feet, and for a second, her reflection looked up at me before vanishing. My recorder crackled softly and caught a faint whisper. "Simon." My name. My blood ran cold. I followed the sound to the theater, guided by a low humming that grew louder with each step. The room was empty, but the seats were soaked. Water pooled down the aisles, and wet footprints led to the stage. I climbed up slowly. No one was there, yet a single brass key rested on a red velvet cushion under the spotlight. I picked it up. It pulsed faintly, as if it had its own heartbeat. The moment my fingers touched it, the air turned freezing. The hum shifted into a chorus of low, whispering voices. Shadows crawled up the walls, stretching into human shapes that moved too fast to be real. I stumbled back, clutching my recorder. My voice shook as I whispered, "If anyone finds this, and if you want more verified true cruise horror accounts, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It keeps these stories alive." The key pulsed again, and the shadows froze mid-motion. I realized then it wasn't just a key, it was bait, a lure meant to draw me deeper, a tether to something hidden under the ship. At the back of the theater, a narrow stairwell waited. Water leaked from below, dark and rising fast. A small sign read, Deck 0, restricted access. My gut twisted. Deck 0 wasn't supposed to exist. I started down, and slowly, each step echoing as the air grew colder, thicker. Doors flickered into view and then disappeared. Some reflected faces I didn't recognize. Others showed her, the woman who shouldn't exist, watching me from behind the glass. Then came the voices, hundreds of them, laughing, crying, whispering my name all at once. The corridor bent in ways that made no sense, walls folding inward as if the ship were breathing. At the end, a crate floated in murky water. The brass key in my hand pulsed violently, its rhythm syncing with my heart. I looked down and saw her face in the reflection. She smiled, hollow-eyed, waiting. I went deeper. The water climbed higher with every step. The brass key throbbed like it was leading me somewhere I wasn't meant to go. The stairwell ended at a narrow hall that didn't match any deck plans. Cabin numbers twisted in endless patterns, 7002, 7005, 7002, 7008, repeating, glitching like a broken signal. Some doors were half open. Inside, shadows moved like smoke, shaping into the faces of passengers who had vanished years ago. Some whispered my name softly. Others just stared with tears running down their ghostly faces. Then she appeared again, walking toward me, her feet not touching the water. Her eyes were deep black voids, but her smile was calm, almost gentle. I froze, lifting the recorder. The corridor bent around her, the walls stretching like melted glass. When I tried to step back, the floor rippled under my boots. The water churned. The ship itself felt alive. This wasn't just a hallway, it was part of something breathing. At the far end, a door appeared with a fading label. Crew only. Maintenance. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The water there was ankle deep and crates were stacked neatly in rows. One of them shifted slightly like something inside was alive. The brass key pulsed harder as I approached. Inside the crate was another key and a logbook filled with names of passengers O had boarded years ago but never left. Their photos were there too, floating faces with empty eyes, mouths open mid-scream. Footsteps echoed behind me, slow, steady. I turned fast. Nothing. Yet wet footprints appeared on the walls, ceiling, even across the floor toward me. My breath came out in sharp bursts. I whispered into the recorder. This corridor. It's alive. It knows my name. It's waiting. The floating crate began to drift forward, pulling me with it. The hallway stretched again, bending like wet glass. The water rose to my chest, freezing cold. Faces rippled across the surface, some pleading, some smiling in silence. The woman floated ahead of me, pointing toward another stairwell marked Deck 0. Officially, it didn't exist, but the key pulsed with fierce energy, anchoring me to her and whatever was hidden below. I raised the recorder with shaking hands. If anyone ever finds this, and if you want more verified cruise horror encounters, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It helps keep these stories alive. The key grew hotter. The water rippled violently, forming faces that twisted and dissolved in seconds. The corridor ended at a metal chamber door glowing faintly. I pushed a crate against it, and it creaked open. Water burst from inside, icy and foul. The smell of rust and decay filled my lungs. Beneath the surface, faces floated silently, eyes open, unblinking. The woman smiled and raised her hand toward me. A whisper echoed in my head, so clear it made my vision blur. Choose, or be claimed. My body trembled as I realized the key wasn't leading me to freedom. It was tying me to this place. The floor split beneath my feet, opening a stairwell that yawned like a mouth. Water rose to my waist, thick and freezing. Shadows crawled up the walls, turning into the same hollow-eyed passengers from the photos. They reached for me, some crying, some staring blankly. The brass key pulsed violently. I gripped it tight. The stairwell opened into a huge chamber, stretching wider than the ship itself. Corridors branched out in impossible angles. The woman floated ahead, her lips moving to a broken lullaby, layered with hundreds of voices whispering my name. Floating crates lined the chamber walls, each one filled with brass keys and rotted ship manifests. Names of the missing stared up from soaked pages, faces pressed against the wood. The water rippled, showing reflections that weren't real. The woman pointed toward another staircase that led even deeper. The key in my palm throbbed so hard it matched my pulse. I finally understood. It wasn't just a tool. It was binding me to this place. Without it, I'd vanish completely. Shadows twisted into tall figures with hollow eyes, their voices clashing into one chaotic chorus of pleading and laughter. Then Alyssa appeared, or someone who looked exactly like her, drifting above the water. Beside her stood the same child I'd seen earlier in the lounge, wide-eyed, repeating one word over and over. Choose. I slid the key into a slot on one of the crates. The water shuddered, then pulled back slightly. Shadows recoiled for a second before rushing forward again. I grabbed the second key and turned it in another slot. The noise stopped. The whispers faded to a hum. A door appeared at the far side of the chamber, trembling. The water beneath me rippled, forming hundreds of tiny faces staring up through the surface. The woman stood by the new door, her face calm, almost inviting. I raised my recorder again and whispered, "If anyone finds this, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It helps keep these true cruise horror stories alive." A crate floated toward me with another brass key and a bundle of old photographs, passengers who had vanished decades ago. The stairwell behind me was gone, replaced by endless water-filled halls. The woman extended her hand. Shadows burst from the water surrounding me. The voices rose to a shriek. Choose or remain forever. That's when I finally understood. Deck Zero wasn't forgotten. It was alive, patient, waiting for the next lost soul. I climbed onto a floating crate as the water sank just enough to let me stand. Every step made ripples that echoed through the impossible corridors. The woman pointed toward a narrow opening I hadn't seen before. I moved toward it slowly, gripping the key. The whispers followed, soft and endless. Faces flickered beneath the surface, some smiling, others screaming in silence. Then the whole chamber began to collapse inward. Water slammed against the walls, shadows coiled and surged, and a final whisper pressed into my skull. Next time, it will claim you. I stumbled into a familiar corridor, gasping. Sunlight glared off the polished rails. Passengers walked by laughing, completely unaware, but I knew the truth. Deck Zero was still there, alive and waiting for whoever dared to find it again. 3 slow knocks echoed from somewhere deep below. I froze. Silence followed. The stairwell behind me was gone. I stood alone on the crate, water lapping at my chest, pulsing to my heartbeat. Shadows rippled across the walls, forming faces of those long lost. The whispers returned, calling my name again and again. The woman floated before me, eyes black and endless, her faint smile unchanged. Around her, the water shimmered, forming the faces of all the missing passengers, their eyes fixed on me, silent, trapped, waiting. I realized then that the brass key wasn't just a key, it was a bridge, a link between the world above and this living nightmare below. Without it, I'd disappear like the rest, but using it meant choosing my fate. The woman's lips moved without sound. Then, in the child's soft voice, I heard it again. Choose. The water twisted violently, swirling beneath the crate like something alive. Dark shadows leapt toward me, then slipped back, afraid of the light. The room shook hard, too, walls bending and folding like they were breathing. I pressed the brass key deeper into the crate, my hands shaking. The second key in my pocket began to pulse faster, like a heartbeat. I whispered into my recorder, my voice trembling. If anyone ever finds this, and if you want more verified, true cruise horror stories, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It keeps these encounters alive. The water started to pull back a little, the shadows fading. Ahead of me, a narrow hallway appeared, glowing faintly, promising a way out. The strange woman floated to the side, lifting her hand toward me. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded like the sea itself. Step forward, or remain forever. My fear locked me in place, but the key throbbed in my palm, pushing me forward. I stepped off the crate and into the glowing hallway. Behind me, the room groaned as if alive, the water rising again, the shadows twisting and screaming. Then everything went still. I stumbled onto Deck 5. Everything looked completely normal. Sunlight reflected off clean rails, passengers walked around laughing, and the crew smiled politely as they passed. But underneath the hum of the engines, I could still hear them, the faint whispers, almost too soft to notice. Reflections in glass panels showed faces that weren't really there. That night, I left my cabin with my recorder in hand, the brass key hidden carefully in my pocket. I knew Deck Zero hadn't disappeared. It was still there, reshaping itself under the ship, waiting. I heard 3 slow, heavy knocks echo from below, soft but certain. I froze. Silence followed. The ship moved on through calm waters, the passengers still laughing, living their day as if nothing was wrong. But I knew the truth. Deck Zero was never gone. It was patient, hungry, waiting for someone else. And when the next curious person wandered too far, too brave or too foolish, the brass key would find its next tether. Music. Story 4. I swear I'd say saw her standing there, but when I blinked, she was gone. My name's Harper Sullivan, 28, freelance travel writer from San Diego. I took this cruise to escape the freezing winter and to write about the comfort of modern luxury cruises. But nothing could have prepared me for what I actually found. The ship had just left port when I noticed something strange. A fog inside the atrium, swirling near the windows even though we were indoors. It was early morning, the sun just rising, most passengers still asleep. Only the deep hum of the engines and the faint squeak of metal echoed through the halls. My curiosity got the better of me. I followed an unfamiliar corridor down toward Deck 6. The sign said, "Crew only," but the door was slightly open, almost like it wanted me to enter, or warn me not to. The smell hit first, wet wood, rust, and a faintly sweet scent like dying flowers. The hallway stretched too far, longer than it should have been. The cabin numbers didn't make sense. 4 and 14, 4 is 17, 414 again, then 418. The carpet was soaked, but the lights above flickered as if the water wasn't there at all. I started recording everything, trying to sound calm. Then I heard it, a laugh, not normal, but thin, broken, echoing. I turned fast. At the end of the hallway stood a woman, pale, still. She raised her hand slowly and gave me a small, chilling smile. I blinked, and she vanished. My heart pounded hard. The hallway seemed to shift and breathe, the walls bending closer. My reflection in the polished metal stretched unnaturally. Shadows in the panels behind me formed faces, silent mouths moving as if whispering. Something pulled me farther down. I reached a door labeled storage, a simple room, but the keycard reader blinked green without me even touching it. The handle felt like ice. I opened it slowly. Crates were stacked neatly in rows. One of them trembled, just slightly. Why? I stepped closer. On top sat a small brass key glowing faintly. I hesitated but picked it up. The instant I touched the cold metal, the lights flickered wildly, and a whisper came through the vent. Not yours. Not yours. The crate moved again, like it was breathing. My chest tightened. I backed away quickly, but the corridor behind me had changed. The walls seemed longer, bending. A new door appeared, cabin 417, slightly open. Inside, I heard the steady drip of water. I stepped in carefully. The room was flooded up to my knees. The bed floated in pieces, the pillows soaked. In the mirror, I saw them, dozens of pale faces pressed against the glass from the other side. They didn't move like people. They just stared. Water rippled across the floor, and I noticed small footprints leading from the bathroom, too small for any adult. Dozens of voices began whispering at once, merging into one thought. The brass key wasn't just a key, it was a guide, a warning, and a trap. I left the room quickly, following the faint glow of the key down a hallway that stretched longer than before. Doors vanished and reappeared. In the panels, reflections of happy passengers flickered, people I'd seen earlier, but when I turned, the hallway was empty. I stopped near a stairwell leading down from Deck 5. My recorder was still on. I whispered into it, trying not to shake. If anyone finds this, and if you want more verified true cruise horror accounts, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It keeps these stories alive. The stairwell led into complete darkness. The air smelled damp and metallic. Faint singing echoed from below, broken and strange. The water from cabin 417 seemed to flow toward the steps, dripping down like it was being pulled. I could feel something waiting below, unseen but aware. I swallowed hard and started down. The ship above felt far away now. Each step creaked with a hollow sound. The brass key glowed faintly, almost urging me forward. At the bottom, the water reached my ankles, calls, and unmoving. The hallway ahead stretched impossibly far, longer than the ship could ever be. The cabin numbers kept changing, 414, 415, 414, 416, repeating endlessly. Some doors were open, revealing flickering shadows that moved too fast to be real. I held my recorder close, whispering everything I saw. A low, broken lullaby drifted from the vents, blending with my own voice on playback. I froze. In one of the cabin mirrors, a pale woman's face stared back, her eyes hollow, her smile faint. When I turned, she was gone. The corridor twisted suddenly. A door labeled Deck 3 Maintenance stood open, even though that area was supposed to be sealed. I went inside slowly. The lights dimmed, flickering weakly. Water pooled around my boots, and in its reflection, hundreds of faces looked up at me, silent, watching. Their mouths moved like they were trying to speak. I stepped closer, and the brass key throbbed harder. The same crate from the upper deck floated toward me through the water. I reached for it, but a whisper hissed from the vents. "You shouldn't touch it. Not yet." I ignored it and fit the key into the lock. It clicked open. Inside was another identical key and a stack of old ship manifests, passenger names that had disappeared years ago. Faces stared at me from faded photographs, some decades old. Footsteps echoed behind me, many footsteps, slow, matching each other perfectly. I turned, but no one was there. Wet footprints began to appear along the walls, up the ceiling, like something walking upside down. My pulse hammered in my chest. The water rose higher, inch by inch. At the far end of the corridor, a door appeared. 419. My stomach dropped. That cabin had been removed from all official ship records. The door was open slightly. Water spilled out, cold and dark. I waded closer. Inside, the room was flooded to my chest. Faces floated beneath the surface. Passengers I had seen alive only hours ago. One of them was Alyssa, the woman from the lounge. Her lips moved under the water, whispering words I couldn't hear. The floor vibrated, deep and slow. Something beneath the ship was stirring, and it wasn't done with us yet. The brass key throbbed wildly in my hand. The crate floated toward me, sending ripples across the water that moved in strange, unnatural patterns. The whispers grew louder, twisting together into one overpowering command. Give, stay, choose, give, stay. My heart pounded as I held both keys tightly, stepping forward even though every part of me screamed to stop. The corridor began folding in on itself, forming angles that made no sense. Water rushed against me, cold and heavy. Faces flashed across the metal walls, appearing and fading with each flicker of light. I heard gasps, soft, broken cries for help, mixed with a haunting lullaby that echoed through the vents. Then Alyssa appeared, floating closer, her face blank, her arm raised toward a hidden stairwell marked Deck 0. My breath caught. Officially, Deck 0 didn't exist. The words sank into me like ice. The key wasn't leading me to safety, it was binding me here, forcing a decision I didn't understand. My voice shook as I whispered into my recorder. This isn't just a ship. It's something else. It's a trap that changes itself. Deck 0. The passengers. All of them. If anyone finds this, it helps keep these verified encounters alive. The water rose fast, churning violently. Shadows from every corner rushed toward me. Then, the floor split open. A stairwell appeared beneath the boards, a black pit swallowing the light. I knew I couldn't turn back. I stepped into the dark, my boots splashing into icy water that climbed past my knees. Every step echoed like a gunshot, the sound swallowed by the endless void below. The brass key pulsed harder, dragging me toward whatever waited beneath. When I reached the bottom, I stepped into a chamber that shouldn't have existed. Deck 0. It stretched far beyond what the ship's structure could allow. Corridors branched off at impossible angles. The walls shimmered as if alive, showing faces of passengers who shouldn't have been there. Alyssa stood on a half-submerged platform, her eyes glassy, her lips moving in a warped lullaby that wove through the countless whispers filling the air. A small child from the lounge floated beside her, staring with unblinking eyes. I moved closer, the water rippling beneath me, revealing faces, missing passengers, floating just below the surface. Some smiled faintly, others screamed in silence. Every step I took made ripples spread across both the water and the air itself. The key pulsed faster, urging me toward another floating crate, just like the one from before. I opened it and found old ship manifests, faded photos, and another brass key identical to mine. On a metal plate inside were words carved deeply. To leave, you must choose one to stay, or all remain. The whispers grew louder, merging into one heavy voice. Choose, give, remain, choose, give, remain. The chamber trembled, the water twisted unnaturally, climbing the walls. Shadows stretched and lunged at me, but melted before touching. My chest tightened as I realized the key wasn't helping me. It was binding me here, forcing me to make a choice. If I didn't choose, the chamber would decide for me. Alyssa lifted her hands and pointed toward a staircase at the far end, leading to what looked like the upper decks. I whispered shakily into my recorder. It helps keep these verified accounts alive. The child floated closer, her lullaby warping into something broken and sharp. The water surged again, and shadows gathered into the shape of a tall, hollow-eyed crew member dripping with dark water that didn't belong anywhere on this hip. I trembled but forced myself to act. I placed the first key into the crate. It clicked, and the shadows recoiled for a second. Then I pressed the second key into a small slot in the floor. The entire room shook. Water rose high and then crashed down, a rush of air carrying whispers of both relief and pain. The light above flickered. The shadows vanished. The lullaby stopped. Alyssa and the child were gone. Deck 0 vanished too, wiped clean as if it had never existed. When I opened my eyes again, I stood in a familiar hallway. Everything looked completely normal. Sunlight shimmered on the rails. Passengers laughed. The crew smiled as they passed. But my recorder caught something. Faint ripples and reflections, soft whispers under the music, tiny drops of water where there shouldn't be any. I stumbled toward guest services, still drenched. I told them about Deck 0, the flooded room, the missing people. The clerk just smiled kindly. "Sir, all passengers are accounted for. Maybe you're just tired." I left without arguing, the brass key cold and heavy in my pocket. I knew the truth. The chamber hadn't vanished. It was hiding, waiting, reshaping itself below. Somewhere deep inside the ship, 3 soft knocks echoed, steady and deliberate. My heart froze. Silence followed. I went back to my cabin, soaked and shaking. I sat there listening to my recorder over and over again. Each playback full of strange whispers, broken lullabies, and faint reflections of faces I recognized from the missing posters. Above me, life continued as usual. Sunlight streamed in, families laughed, and music drifted down the halls. But beneath it all, something stirred. Deck 0 existed, still waiting. I went to guest services again, desperate to make them understand. My voice cracked as I tried to explain. The lower deck, the water, the faces. The clerk smiled politely again and handed me a pamphlet. "No maintenance issues, sir. All cabins are fine. Maybe you need some rest." I walked out slowly, my chest tight. Every reflection in the hallway glass looked wrong, showing passengers from decades past, whispering things I couldn't hear. Some were crying, some smiled faintly, like they already knew. I realized the ship hadn't erased Deck 0. It had absorbed it, blending it into itself. It was alive, reshaping reality, feeding off those who found it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The brass key glowed faintly on my nightstand, humming softly like it still breathed. In the mirror, shadows shifted, patterns twisting and moving on their own. Small ripples appeared on the carpet, glistening like water. A distorted lullaby hummed through the vents. I tried to leave, to convince myself it wasn't real. But as I walked, the ship changed around me. Corridors curved differently, cabin numbers rearranged. Reflections didn't follow me. They watched me. I saw faces of people who should have been gone, smiling sadly from behind the glass. I made one last attempt. I went to the stairwell leading below the ship, unsure whether it would take me to Deck 0 again or just a maintenance floor. As I descended, cold water rose around my legs. Shadows swirled, taking shape. Tall, hollow-eyed crew members reaching for me with dripping hands. I gripped the brass key tightly, heart pounding. The second key throbbed faintly in my pocket. I knew now it wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a link to the ship's memory, its hunger, its will. It had claimed so many already. It could claim me next. When I finally reached the top deck, sunlight cut through the fog. Passengers wandered peacefully, laughing, unaware. My recorder played back a whisper in the wind. "Next time." Then, from below, 3 slow knocks echoed again. Deep, patient, final. I froze. Silence followed. Now I sit alone in my cabin, tearing at the brass key on the table. I haven't slept. I haven't touched it. The air feels heavy with whispers. I can hear faint dripping from the vents, the same soft lullaby curling through the walls. Outside, the ocean looks calm, but I know better. The ship hides its secrets well. Deck 0 is still there, beneath us, shifting, waiting. and the next person who goes too far might never come back. Music. Story 5. Why is the fog so thick here, inside the ship? I stopped walking. My name is Ethan Morales, 32, logistics manager from Miami. I booked this cruise to finally unwind, to breathe after months of long hours and stress. But what I found wasn't rest. It was something that shouldn't exist. The ship drifted slowly through a fog so heavy it seemed alive, swallowing the upper decks whole. Most passengers were still asleep. The usual laughter and chatter were gone. Only the low hum of the engines and the soft groan of metal filled the silence. I leaned over the railing of Deck 7, expecting to see nothing but endless mist. Instead, I saw movement, shadows shifting far below, where no lower deck should have been visible at all. Something deep inside me pulled me toward it. Curiosity, fear, maybe both. I followed the faint glow of corridor lights leading down toward Deck 4. The air changed, damp, metallic, and strangely sweet, like old perfume mixed with rust. I slid my keycard at the elevator, though Deck 4 was marked crew access only. Still, the doors opened with a soft chime, almost as if the ship had been expecting me. The moment I stepped inside, everything went still, not empty quiet, but the kind of silence that breathes, thick and waiting, as if the entire ship was holding its breath for what came next. I stepped out. The hallway looked familiar, but something was off. The cabin numbers didn't follow the right order. Some even matched the numbers of passengers who had gone missing on past cruises. The carpet was damp, in strange spots, even though the ceiling was dry. As I passed cabin 419, I noticed the door was slightly open. I didn't want to look inside, but something pulled me toward it. The room was flooded up to my knees, water rippling quietly. Wet footprints led from one side to the other, and in the middle sat an open suitcase. Everything inside was untouched except for a small brass key lying on top, faintly glowing. I reached out before I could stop myself. A whisper slid through the vents. "Don't take it. Don't take it." The key slid into my palm as if it wanted to be held. It was warm, too warm for a flooded room. I pressed it against the suitcase's lock and it clicked open. Inside was a strange map of the ship, completely different from the one passengers used. It showed hidden hallways, sealed doors, and staircases leading into nowhere. The ship on the paper seemed alive, shifting and breathing as I stared. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, careful, almost hesitant. I turned, but the corridor was empty. Only shadows stretched too far along the walls. I turned on my recorder and described everything. The wrong numbers, the damp carpet, the warped reflections. But when I replayed my voice, I heard another faint whisper beneath it, like someone repeating my words just after me. I tried to leave, but the hallway stretched endlessly. The doors I had seen moments ago vanished, replaced by walls that looked wet and uneven. Then I found myself back in front of cabin 419, but it was different now. The door looked taller, darker, dripping water from its frame. The brass key in my hand pulsed faster. The whispers returned, layered and desperate. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." My body froze. The fog from above deck began to slide into the corridor, spreading across the floor like a living thing. I wanted to scream, but the air caught in my throat, swallowed by the silence. Then I saw movement in a mirror at the far end. Not my reflection, but a man's. A pale crew member walking backward, his eyes hollow, mouth moving without sound. He raised a trembling hand toward me. The key in my palm burned hot. The mirror cracked, spiderwebs spreading across its surface. The man disappeared, and a cold gust pushed me forward, straight into the thick fog. The ship's layout no longer made sense. Corridors stacked on top of each other, stairs floating in the air. The walls shifted as I walked. Then I saw it. A stairway labeled Deck 0. Officially, it didn't exist. But the brass key pulsed warmly, guiding me toward it. I descended. The space below stretched impossibly wide. Water dripped from pipes above, and faint figures floated under the surface, motionless, pale eyes staring. In the center stood a small child, singing a soft lullaby. Each note twisted in the air, wrong and warped. When I reached out, the child turned, its face flickering, half human, half decayed. My stomach knotted. Behind me, footsteps echoed again, dozens of them, perfectly in sync. The walls began to close in, the air thick and heavy. My recorder fell into the water but kept recording. Then a whisper crawled through my mind. "Give us something or you'll stay." I finally understood. The key wasn't a tool to escape. It was an offering. I tried to retrace my steps, but the corridors had rearranged themselves. Doors faced new directions, numbers shifting before my eyes. Cabin 419 appeared again, water spilling into the hall. My hands shook as I held the key. It throbbed in my palm like it had a pulse. I pressed it against random doors. Some opened, others refused. Every step came with whispers, hundreds of voices layered together, some begging, others angry. At the end of one corridor, I caught a flash of movement, a uniformed figure darting by. When I turned fully, there was no one, only a trail of wet footprints crawling up the wall. I kept moving until I waded into another corridor, half submerged. Water reached my knees, and reflections rippled beneath the surface. Faces stared back at me, familiar faces. A woman I'd had breakfast with, a man from the lounge, all of them gone missing. Their mouths hung open, screaming without sound. Then came a deep hum beneath my feet. Not the ship's engine, but something alive, vibrating through the metal floor. I realized the ship itself wasn't just haunted, it was aware. Every door, every reflection, every sound responded like it had a mind. I followed a flickering light toward another stairwell marked Deck 0. The same impossible floor. As I descended, the key in my pocket glowed brighter, almost tugging me downward. The air turned cold and heavy with the smell of rust and seawater. Faint singing echoed through the vents. The hall opened into a massive chamber. Water reached my thighs. Shapes moved under the surface, rising and falling like hands reaching up. In the center floated a large crate with an ornate brass lock. My key vibrated in my hand. The whispers surrounded me again. Open it. Open it. Give us. I inserted the key. The crate shifted as if it breathed. Inside were old papers, ship manifests, and faded photos of passengers, some missing, others from decades ago. Their faces stared back blankly. I felt cold to my core. Footsteps echoed behind me again, slow and synchronized. I spun around, flashlight trembling, but there was nothing except rippling water. A whisper brushed my ear. You shouldn't be here. Leave now or stay forever. The crate shook violently. A single sheet floated up, showing another impossible map of the ship. Then the water started rising fast, up to my chest within seconds. Panic hit me. I ran for a light ahead, but the hallway twisted like it was alive. The walls bent and closed in. The ripples in the water formed shapes, faces staring, smiling, crying. The child from the lounge rose from the surface, eyes hollow, reaching for me. I tumbled, fell into the freezing water, and crawled toward a stairwell. The key pulsed wildly. I shoved it into a small slot in the wall. A hidden door slid open, revealing another staircase going deeper. The lullaby grew louder. Shadows swirled beneath the water, stretching upward to grab me. I ran. The water chased me, the whispers fusing into one deep voice. Stay, stay, stay. I hit a dead end. The water rose to my waist. A shadow peeled off the wall, tall and human-shaped but wrong, mouth moving without sound. The key burned in my hand, and suddenly a hidden door opened beside me. I didn't hesitate. I dove through, landing in water waist deep. The air stank of rust and decay, like the ship had been rotting under the sea for years. I was inside the underdeck chamber now, larger than anything that could fit on a ship. The shadows around me twisted like they were alive. Some looked like passengers, others like crew, frozen in place, their faces distorted with terror. The child from the lounge stood on a platform, singing the same lullaby. The key pulsed again, guiding me forward. I lifted my recorder, capturing everything, the whispers overlapping endlessly. Stay, stay, stay. The water moved against me, heavy and alive. Something brushed my arm, freezing my skin. Then I saw Alyssa, a passenger I'd met before, now standing still, her eyes hollow, lips unmoving. The water around her spun slowly. I called her name, but nothing changed. The key's warmth felt like the only real thing keeping me grounded. I pressed it into a glowing slot in the floor. Light rippled through the chamber, revealing hundreds of faces beneath the surface, passengers lost long ago. Their mouths moved, whispering words I couldn't understand. The lullaby grew louder, blending with a chorus of whispers. Every trapped face turned toward me in perfect unison. The water stirred violently, and from the far end, a crew member appeared, expressionless, uniform dripping seawater. She pointed toward another floating crate. I recognized the lock. My key fit perfectly. I turned it. Inside was another identical key and a note. To leave, one must stay. If not, all remain. My chest tightened. Behind me, the whispers became a chant. Choose, give, remain. Alyssa raised her arm, pointing straight at me. I realized then, the keys were never meant to open doors. They were part of a trade. Without a sacrifice, the ship would decide. The chamber shifted, walls folding, shadows stretching closer. I clutched both keys, breathing hard. Faces stared from the water, their eyes pleading. The whispers turned into screams. I lifted my recorder and spoke. If anyone finds this, and if you enjoy true cruise horror stories, subscribe to Eerie Hour. It helps keep these verified accounts alive. The chamber stilled, just for a heartbeat, like it was listening. Then everything erupted. Shadows merged into one massive form, a towering crew member, eyes hollow, dripping seawater. I ran, splashing through the rising flood. The key pulsed violently, pulling me toward a submerged stairwell. I dove into it, water crashing after me. My lungs burned, my legs heavy, the voices behind me shouting one word: stay. When I finally burst through, I found myself back on a familiar deck. Sunlight reflected off metal rails. Passengers laughed. Everything looked normal again. My clothes were soaked, my hands shaking. Alyssa was gone. The child, the shadows, the chamber, all gone. But the brass key still glowed faintly in my pocket. I knew it wasn't over. The ship was alive. The underdeck was still there, waiting for its next victim. I staggered to guest services. My voice shook as I spoke. Deck 0, lower chamber. People are missing. Please. The clerk smiled calmly. Sir, there is no Deck 0, no chamber. Are you feeling all right? That's when I understood. The ship seemed normal to everyone else, but I had seen what it truly was. And I carried proof. The key, the recorder, and the memory of hundreds of hollow eyes staring from the dark water. The upper deck looked peaceful. Sunlight shimmered off the metal rails. Passengers laughed, sipping coffee, completely unaware of the horrors below. I held the brass key tight, water still dripping from my soaked clothes. My mind spun. Everything around me looked too perfect, too ordinary. But I knew better. Deck 0 was real. The underdeck chamber existed, and it was still down there, waiting. I went back to the stairwell that led down. My heart pounded hard enough to echo in my ears. The whispers were gone now, but their memory stayed, as did the haunting tune of that warped lullaby. My recorder captured every sound, the faint drips, the hollow creaks, the faint echo of something moving deep below. It was my only proof, if anyone ever believed me. I stepped down carefully. The brass key throbbed in my hand like a living thing, urging me forward. The water rose quickly, brushing my knees, swirling as if alive. Shadows danced beneath the surface, forming human figures that melted away before my eyes. In the center of the chamber floated a crate, larger than before, darker, heavier. Resting on it was another identical brass key. A note was carved into a brass plate. Choose, or the chamber chooses for you. The shadows gathered together, twisting into one giant shape. Its hollow eyes glared straight at me, silent but screaming. I could feel it judging me, deciding my fate. Behind it, the passengers trapped below the surface writhed slowly, their faces pleading for release. Alyssa's reflection flickered on the water, her face pale and twisted. I finally understood. One key was meant for the crate, the other for the chamber itself. It was a cruel choice. Lock the chamber and risk trapping souls forever, or unlock it and risk unleashing the thing that haunted. This ship. My mind raced. The child floated closer, eyes wide, singing that broken lullaby. I felt the pressure of countless unseen passengers pressing around me, their whispers crawling under my skin. My hands shook, but I acted. I slid the first key into the crate's lock. It clicked. A faint golden light spread through the water. The shadows hissed and pulled back, vanishing into the dark. I grabbed the second key and pushed it into the slot hidden in the floor. The whole chamber trembled. Water surged violently upward, splashing my face. A gust of freezing wind rushed past, filled with whispers, some relieved, some weeping. The water began to fall. The shadows disappeared. The lullaby stopped mid-note, leaving an aching silence. I stumbled back toward the stairwell, gasping, drenched, shaking. When I looked again, Deck 0 was gone, vanished completely. The walls were normal. The cabin numbers made sense again. Everything looked the same as before. The passengers laughed in the halls, smiling as if nothing had happened. I went to guest services. This key, I said breathlessly. This proves it. Deck 0 exists. The chamber below. It's real. People are missing. They only smiled politely. Sir, all passengers are accounted for. Maybe you're just exhausted. I couldn't believe it. I walked away, recorder clutched in my hand. The brass key pulsed once more before turning cold in my palm. Back in my cabin, I replayed the footage. Faint movements flickered in reflections. Shadows twisting behind me, the child's pale face flashing across a mirror. Water stains appeared on the floor where there had been none before, and somewhere in the recording, the lullaby still played softly, almost too faint to hear. That's when I realized the chamber hadn't been destroyed. It was still there, hidden, reshaping itself somewhere deep below the decks, waiting for someone else to find. The brass key now sits on my nightstand. I haven't dared to touch it again. Yet every night, I feel it calling faintly, as if the ship remembers me. I know it's only a matter of time before someone else follows the whispers. The last thing my recorder picked up that night was the sound of 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoing through my cabin walls. I froze, listening, heart pounding. And then came silence. I don't remember a cruise ever being this quiet. No hum of engines, no clinking glasses, no laughter from the bars, just me, walking through a dim hallway toward Deck 5, where the theater was supposed to be. My name is Olivia Harper, 26, a freelance sound designer from Seattle. I booked this cruise for a break, a little sun, jazz nights, and maybe some sound recordings for my next project. But what I found was something completely different. The theater had been advertised as a hidden gem, a private cinematic experience for night guests. Curiosity got the best of me, so after the last show, I slipped in to explore. The hall leading there smelled faintly of mildew, the carpet damp beneath my shoes. The lights flickered weakly, buzzing like tired insects. When I reached the door, it was plain metal. No design, no markings, just a small plaque reading, "Private access only." The handle turned on its own. The door creaked open before I even touched it. Inside, the theater was empty, or at least it seemed that way. Rows of red seats glimmered under faint emergency lights. On the massive screen, static flickered, no film running. The air smelled of old popcorn and wet fabric. A faint PA announcement crackled. "The silent theater will begin shortly. Please remain seated." My heart thudded. I stepped inside. My footsteps echoed strangely, swallowed by the silence too quickly. Then I noticed them, wet footprints leading up the aisle to the front row. My throat went dry. A soft voice whispered my name. "Olivia." I froze. No one was there. Every seat was empty, yet faint murmurs rose around me, distant like a crowd whispering from under the floor. I moved forward, trembling, until I saw a brass envelope on one of the seats. My name was engraved on it. I picked it up. The temperature dropped instantly. I could see my breath fog the air. Behind the flickering screen, something moved. I zoomed my camera. A crew member stood there, motionless, soaked, eyes empty. The static deepened. The rows of seats began to stretch, multiplying endlessly, bending into impossible angles. Whispers overlapped in the dark. "She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't be here." I wanted to run, but my body refused. Reviewing my footage, I saw faces in the seats, missing passengers staring blankly. The exit was gone. Only a small side door remained, leading not to safety but another endless row of seats. My pocket felt heavy. The brass key was there, glowing faintly. I didn't remember bringing it. The whispers grew louder, circling me like waves. I gripped the key tightly. A woman's voice spoke above them all, calm and near. "You record everything?" I swallowed hard. "Yes." "Good," she said. "Make sure they remember." The PA buzzed again. "Welcome. Enjoy the show." The seats stretched into infinity. Shadows crawled between them. The reflections on the walls shifted. Not mine, but faces of those long lost, their mouths slowly moving in silent rhythm. I turned toward the stage. The key pulsed in my hand, brighter than before. Without thinking, I pressed it into a small brass slot near the edge. The floor vibrated. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity held me still. I hit record again and stepped down slowly, my footsteps echoing in sync with the whispers above. "Don't leave," they said. "Don't leave." Shadows twisted under the water, moving like broken hands trying to reach the surface. Above them, rows of passengers sat frozen in chairs, staring silently, eyes wide open, faces pale, some still dressed in damp evening clothes. A crew member appeared suddenly at the far end of the flooded theater. Her uniform was perfect, her face blank, her voice calm. "They watch you record," she said softly. "That's your purpose." Panic spread through me like fire. I didn't understand her words, but they felt heavy, almost like a warning. I lifted my recorder and spoke quickly, my voice shaking as I described every impossible thing, every whisper, every reflection that moved when I didn't. "If anyone ever finds this," I whispered, "it helps keep these verified accounts alive." I stepped closer to the water, trying to recognize the faces in the seats. That's when I froze. The brass key floated above the rippling surface, glowing brighter with every second. The shadows below twisted violently, forming shapes that didn't look human. A faint lullaby drifted through the vents, soft, slow, and sickly sweet. I didn't know the song, but every note made my chest tighten. The seated passengers turned their heads in perfect unison, all eyes locking on me. My feet started moving on their own. I tried to stop, but something unseen pushed me forward. The room stretched unnaturally, endless rows of seats reflecting back at impossible angles. Time itself felt warped, moments dragging, snapping, bending. Then a whisper brushed against my ear, too close to be real. "You can leave," it said, "if you give something in return." I spun around. No one. Then I saw her, my sister. But she wasn't really her. Her eyes were empty like the others. The air turned heavy, damp, smelling like wet cloth and rusted metal. I could barely breathe. My body felt like it wasn't mine, dragged forward by invisible strings toward the dark water. Every footstep echoed endlessly, as if the room had no walls. The lullaby grew louder, humming through the floor, vibrating in my chest. I reached the water's edge. Faces stared up at me, pale, unmoving, mouths half open in silent screams. Their eyes followed every move I made. I tried to step back, but the ground shifted beneath me, tilting just enough to push me closer. The theater felt alive, stretching, breathing, changing shape like it was reacting to my fear. Then I saw her again, standing across the flooded hall, my sister. For one brief moment, relief filled me, but her face stayed blank, her eyes black and hollow. Slowly she raised her hand, beckoning me closer. My heart hammered, my mind whispered, "She's not alive. She's part of it now." The brass key throbbed in my pocket, glowing through the fabric. I pulled it out, and its light spread across the water. The shadows recoiled, pulling back violently as if afraid of it. The empty seats shimmered, the walls bending and folding in impossible ways. I finally understood. The key wasn't just metal, it was a guide, the only thing that could lead me through this nightmare. Suddenly, the same crew member appeared on the stage, perfectly still, her face blank. She pointed toward the large screen, where a small hidden panel was barely visible beneath it. I knew then it was my only way out. I stepped into the knee-deep water, forcing myself forward as whispers rose all around me, blending into words that chilled my blood. "Join us. Stay forever. Don't leave." Every mirror in the room warped, the reflections twisting grotesquely. My sister's face flickered. One moment human, the next a hollow mask blending into the crowd. I clenched my jaw and pushed through the freezing water, reaching the stage. My hands shook as I pulled open the panel she had pointed to. A narrow staircase spiraled downward, swallowed in darkness. The air pulsed like a heartbeat. I hesitated, then glanced back. My sister stood frozen in the water, mouth moving silently, singing the same warped lullaby. I turned and ran. Footsteps echoed behind me, soft, wet, matching my pace perfectly. Shadows rippled along the walls, chasing me down the spiraling stairs. I clutched the brass key tight, feeling it pulse against my palm like it was alive. At the bottom was a plain wooden door, wet and old, with no markings. I shoved the key into a small slot on the frame. It clicked. The door groaned open slowly, and for the first time, I saw real light, warm, golden, familiar. I stumbled forward, falling onto the carpeted floor of the deck above. When I looked back, the door was gone. The theater was gone. No water, no seats, no whispers. My sister was gone too. Only the key remained, cold and heavy in my hand. And somewhere, deep in the ship's belly, I could still hear it, the faint, steady rhythm of 3 knocks echoing through the walls. I ran to the upper deck, soaked, shaking, gasping for breath. The morning sun burned bright, reflecting off the sea. Everything looked normal again. Passengers chatted and laughed as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I ran straight to guest services, words tumbling out. "Deck 5, the theater. There were people. It's real." The clerk blinked at me calmly, her tone polite. "There's no theater on Deck 5, sir. Are you sure you're feeling all right?" My skin went cold. They were lying. I could feel it. I walked out, dazed, searching for any sign, any person who might have seen what I did. Crew members smiled as they passed, directing passengers with hollow eyes that didn't seem to blink. In the reflection of a polished railing, I saw them, rows of faces, watching me silently from the dark. That night, my fear and curiosity dragged me back to Deck 5. The hallway looked ordinary. The door was gone. No trace of the theater, no sound of water, just quiet carpeted floors and the faint hum of the engines. Yet, in the distance, I could hear it, a soft, haunting lullaby playing. Somewhere far below. I searched the ship's system logs, but there was no record of any theater, no reports, no malfunctions. It was as if the place had never existed. Still, the brass key sat in my pocket, glowing faintly in the dark. I couldn't let go of it. The moment I touched it, I felt something, an invisible pull toward the back of the ship. The whispers returned, layered, desperate. Come back. Come back. Come back. The shadows around the walls thickened. My camera caught flickers of movement, but I didn't dare look. Then, 3 knocks echoed again, slow, deliberate, vibrating through the metal walls. My breath caught. The sound didn't come from any door. It came from the ship itself, from the place between this world and whatever waited below. I finally understood. The theater hadn't disappeared. It had simply released me, for now. But it was still there, waiting patiently for its next guest. The brass key pulsed one final time, sending a faint shimmer through the air, like a doorway forming and fading. Then the knocking stopped. Silence returned. My sister was still gone. The missing passengers were never found. The ship carried on, cheerful and ordinary. But I remember everything. The key, the whispers, the lullaby. And I know that the theater below deck still waits for the next curious soul who dares to listen.